Hello, welcome to Political Parties and Nominations. One can almost feel the excitement that you must be feeling right now through your screen because this video is going to be great. Welcome. So, political parties first, nominations next. Sit back and enjoy. So, political parties. Obviously, and we're going to talk about these differences because they're going to be important as we hit into interest groups later in the week. But one is they seek to win elections. They're not issue-oriented at all. That's not something that concerns them, that overly concerns them. They represent a variety of issues. Single-issue voters often think, oh, well, this is the issue that I'm focused on, so this must be what the party's also interested in. Not really. They want to win elections. They want to put the person that is on their party ticket in the seat, either the president, or anywhere in the legislative branch. Interest groups, on the other hand, in which we're going to talk about coming up, is they're not really concerned with elections at all. They only care about their issue. That's the only thing they want. The NRA doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. If you'll support their policies, they will make sure, not make sure, but they will help you get elected. So that's what they're interested in. They don't care what party you are. That's what they're interested in. What are political parties? Essentially, they're made up of these individuals who basically organize to win elections. That's, again, their whole purpose. They operate the government, and they certainly influence public policy. If you were asked to characterize the liberals and conservatives, what words come to mind for you? What traits define these two different groups? And it's different for all of us. We'll all come up with a number of different things that we would say, oh, this is the prototypical Republican, prototypical Democrat. And we'll discuss this a little bit more as we get into class. These are broad generalizations. And you might look at that and say, well, my parents are a Democrat and they support, one of these is usually Republican. That's true. That's very possible. These are broad generalizations. What do Republicans generally want? Low taxes, right? They want low taxes for all. Certainly less government intervention. They would like to see the government kind of sit back. Their idea is the best government's the government that governs least. Fewer rights, I should say, and leniency for those accused of crimes. Fewer social programs and available aid. And they do believe, and this is, again, another broad generalization, but generally Republicans believe that government is part of the problem. What do Democrats believe? Taxes based on income. So a sliding scale. The more money you make, the more money you pay in taxes. Certainly more government intervention, whether that means economically or socially, but government should be a part of the solution there, according to Democrats. More rights, certainly more leniency for those accused of crimes, more social programs and aid from, across the board, really, whether it's education or social welfare, anything. Generally, Democrats support more funding for these programs. And generally, again, very broad generalization, Democrats believe that government can be a good solution to some of the nation's problems. Stereotypical characterizations of Republicans, they tend to be male, higher income brackets. And higher education is there, and we will see with this election, we're starting to see a realignment on that. And we'll talk about realignment when we get into voting and elections later. Tend to be professional, what we call white-collar jobs. Those tend to be professional jobs, business-type jobs. People over 50 tend to be more in line with the Republican Party. And Protestants are Republicans more often than not. Democrats, certainly female. We talked about the gender gap. Not the gender wage gap, but just the gender gap with voting. It's very real. Women tend to vote Democrat more often than men. Lower income brackets, for sure. These tend to be the blue-collar workers are in this. Again, as noted on the other side with higher education, lower education had typically been with the Democrats. What we've seen in the last election and what they're wondering where the trend is college-educated voters are now leaning Democrat. Heavily, depends on where you are, certainly geographically, but they are leaning Democrat. Professors are, by and large, Democrats. They, tend to be more Democratic and on the left. Manual laborers, labor union members, as mentioned, blue-collar workers, people under 30, mentioned this earlier with the Churchill quote that if you aren't labor when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a Tory when you're old, you have no brain. That's what his view was, but generally younger people are Democrats, and Catholics and Jews tend to be Democrats. And you'll say, oh, I know a Catholic that's a Republican. Absolutely possible. You might even know several Protestants who are Democrats. Absolutely possible. These are, again, are broad generalizations. Midwest Catholics tend to be more single-issue voters, and that issue tends to be pro-life, and that would put them on the other side. East Coast, Mid-Atlantic Catholics tend not to be single-issue voters and focus more on the whole platform. The founders' views, not good. They did not, this is on political parties. And there are a few good things, and we'll talk, I have a list, and we'll talk about a few of the good things they do, because they do. But the founders warned us of this. Federalist number 10, liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an ailment, an alignment, without which it instantly expires. But it could not be a less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourish faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life, because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. You might say, oh man, what's Madison talking about there? So we can understand it. This is one of the most memorable and widely cited quotes of the Federalist Papers. One option for dealing with the faction, according to Madison, would be to simply take away liberty. If people are not free to form and express their own points of view, then factions could never take hold. Excuse me. However, this solution is worse than the problem. Instead, Madison advocates designing a system of government that can control and limit the detrimental effects of the faction. So why do we have a two-party system? One, tradition. It's worked. It's been consistent. We've been able to work within it, and it's functional. So it works. The electoral system is set up as such. We have a winner-take-all system. Winner-take-all does not really allow third parties any action or any chance of winning. A winner-take-all system, and it's a plurality and not a majority, meaning you just have to win. If there's three people running, a Democrat and a Republican and a Green Party candidate, for instance, in a winner-take-all congressional seat, if a Republican wins 34% of the vote, the Democrat wins, 30% of the vote, and the Green Party candidate wins 25 or whatever the math is on that percent of the vote. The winner is the person who had the highest percentage. They don't need to win 50% of the vote to win that seat. So the electoral system is set up against third parties. So it has been there, and it allows the two-party system to function so well. That's one thing that the two parties can agree on, the Democrats and Republican, is they do not want to allow other people to enter into this game. So they do agree on that, and they actually work pretty hard at making laws that only, the two parties show up on most ballots. Party origins. Washington, in his farewell address, and you might remember this from U.S. history, and we will go into a little bit of detail in class about this, had warned about this. He had warned about the problems with parties, that they would be divisive and they would not lead to really a healthy system in the American political environment. We've gone through these party eras, and it started right off the bat. So as much as they can complain about it, and they did, ultimately in 1796, you get the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Over time, we've seen four major political parties, or party eras, I should say. And as you can see here, started out Democratic, Republican, and Democrat, and this was a long, long stretch for them. This was the first one, 1800 to 1860 was the era of the Democrats. And then you go, and it goes the era of the Republicans, 1860 to 1932. During these two party eras, and the next one as well, it tended to be that these presidents also had at least control of one house of Congress, at a minimum. Usually both, almost always both, but at a minimum. And we now define divided government a little bit differently, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then one more era, the Democrats, 1932 to 68, is the presidency. Again, as you can see, one Republican in there, but it was an era of that party. Era of the divided government, 1968 to present. We do have this now. So this is where the president obviously is held by one party, and then either one or both houses of Congress is run by the opposing party. Why do we call it divided government? Well, it's hard to get things done if you don't have the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. If you have all three of those, you can put through any policy you want, and it's going to get the votes, and it'll go through. In divided government, that wasn't the case. And it isn't the case currently, because once you'll have challenges. You can have challenges, so you can try to pass a bill and it will run into problems. It's not just going to be green lighted all the way through, because one party is likely going to work in opposition to foil any plans that you have there. So that's the party error. So all of those are negatives, right? And that's a lot of negatives that we were talking about with the political parties. What are some good things? And we'll talk about these with the nominations, but one is they do run candidates. There's so many races and so many, names. It's nice to have these party labels so you can at least be mildly informed on someone that you might want to vote for. 2, they check the other party. They're there because they call out the loyal, in the UK, in a parliamentary system, they call it the loyal opposition, and they're very friendly about it until they name call and stuff, but they're very friendly about it. We sit there and call them names, in the US, and we view it as petty. Americans tend to view this portion as petty. They do inform the public. Again, most generally know who they support. Either you're Republican or Democrat. Most Americans will say, well, I'm a middle of the road voter, but you still probably lean one way or the other. But they know generally who they support, and this informing the public helps. It also can be considered a con, and then they do organize government. Congress, state legislatures, all those are organized by party, and they do work within this system, within the party, to get things done or to block things from getting done. Cons, so many of you know, again, obviously we are divided. Politicians have always been. I mean, that's just the nature of it, but Americans were not always necessarily so. Sure, we have in our history have had times where we did not see eye to eye with other Americans, and we tended to disagree over things, but lately it's been fairly bad. Back in the 1950s, a poll was done, and only 10% of voters had negative feelings toward the opposing party. That now stands at 90%. They have about 90% bad feelings towards the other party. So as you can see, things are changing. And Americans are tending to get a little bit more involved and at least have more opinions and view the other party with negative feelings, whereas in the past, they just viewed them as having different opinions. As always, you have any questions, let me know. We will go over again some of this in class, but shoot me an email if something is unclear.